Hi Cody, it's Professor Sasser. I hope you're doing well. I hope that the end of the semester hasn't been too stressful for you and you're almost getting ready for graduation and that you're ready to finish creative writing, which I think you've done really well in. So I'm glad we had that conversation before the semester started and we were able to get you into this class so you could finish your English requirement, and I hope it wasn't too painful for you. So you're almost done. I hope that all the guidelines for the final writing portfolio made sense to you. We got to have a good conversation about your poetry, so I think you know where you're going to revise that. And I'm going to give you a few pointers on your stories right now. So remember, you only need to revise one of them for your final writing portfolio. And then all of that needs to be submitted on Sunday, all in one document. So if you need to pop by my office and ask me any questions about how to do that, we can. And I really liked watching you develop this semester. I think that you probably haven't before. You said you do read a lot, and that's obvious because you actually have really good descriptions in both your poetry and your fiction, and you have really good language. And it was fun to sort of watch you be playful of that because you probably don't get to do that in many of your other classes. So I hope this was a refreshing break for you. So your first story. What I really like about your first story is that we get a really good sense of your characters and they feel like real people. The way they talk, the way they interact is the way that probably this group of people would. So you had a really good realistic take on these characters and how they would behave in the situation. So that works really well. There's a couple of technical details just in story writing that I'm going to point out to you. When you're writing dialogue, you did it a lot better in your second story than your first one. So it is, like you say, Stan yells, and then it's comma, quotation marks, and then it's a capital letter when you start that sentence. So Stan, comma, quotation marks, Stan yells, comma, quotation marks, get the dog, exclamation point, and then end quote. So the quote always goes after that last punctuation, and that it's always capitalized. The first letter of the dialogue is always capitalized. So just as you move through the story, make sure the dialogue is set up that way. So quotation marks around the dialogue, and that first word of the dialogue is capital letter. Okay. Dialogue doesn't necessarily have to be set on its own line. Some people do that and some people don't. So you can have dialogue right in the middle of the paragraph, which is okay. You did that a few times. Remember, in the second story, it seemed like maybe the formatting got a little bit funky because you didn't have, whenever you entered onto a new line, it looks like you have new paragraphs that should be indented. The whole story runs along like that left-hand side just flat. And just make sure you're indenting anywhere there's a new paragraph or a new piece of dialogue in that second story. So just format-wise, make sure you're doing that. And then I think that both stories probably need a good edit. Just there's places where you capitalize like Frank, but other places you don't capitalize his name. The dog in the second story, Diesel, sometimes he's capitalized, sometimes he's not. He should be capitalized for the whole story. There's times that I think you're just, the spell checker didn't pick up certain words, like the third page into scene 2, you say the men, I think it's supposed to say begin to break out into laughter. In your second story, I found just a few places where I think I understand the word that you're using, but the spell check didn't catch it. So you say first a shower, it says fist a shower, followed by hair drying. So just make sure, and then the wrong wasted is used there. So just make sure you do really good, just read through, edit, and maybe have someone else give it a read through as well, just for those mechanics issues. And then the only last mechanical thing is that I think you do a really good job. Your instinct was to write both stories in present tense, like it's happening right now, and I think that was a really good instinct. You just want to make sure that you are staying in present tense. So tense is all about the verbs you're using. So it's that time of year again, early spring. It's just before the sun rises as we head to our favorite fishing pole. So head, and it's time. The sun hasn't even hit. I still have my long sleeve shirt on. All of the verbs are in present tense. And then if you shift to you know, in the second part, just drop it all right, said Skip. It should be says Skip, because we want to write the whole story in present tense. So all of the verbs in the story then need to stay in present, if that makes sense. And it was a great instinct. I think it puts us right into the action. So just making sure that all your verbs match and that they all stay in present tense for both stories. And honestly, I liked the tension in the second story. You did the assignment well. We get the characters sort of interacting. We're getting a little bit of sense of them. We get a great sense of the setting. And then the story does reach some climax where, you know, they're saving Frank, and then some resolution, which is what the story was supposed to do. I just found the characters in your second story more interesting, maybe because it was a couple. I got a really good sense, like I felt that they were very familiar with one another, and you weren't just putting them together so that they could have this moment with the bear. Like, part of the good part of the second story was that we cared about their relationship and the bear. You know, the bear was the cool part where it climaxes, and, you know, the climax of the story is when, you know, the bear attack. But before that, the story was enjoyable because we liked watching these two characters interact. So I think the second story might be where I would put more of my feedback and energy for you to revise. So a few things I said about the second story is that you use really nice description, like you use that metaphor exercise, whether you knew it or not, in the story. So, you know, he wakes up, the alarm's like a gunshot, he feels like a little kid about to blow out his candles, he's excited about the hike. I think that was a really good intro to the story. And then you have, which is an interesting tension, small tension between the characters, that she's not as excited, right? And that he's kind of dragging her along on this. And that, I think that complicates your characters and makes them more interesting. And you have this nice description of how she looks through his eyes, that she's beautiful, and there's this elegance and beauty about her, and you describe her really nicely. And in the same breath that you are describing her, they're also being sarcastic with each other, which is cool. I like that she said she spun her around like a piece of paper in the wind. That was a great description. That the dog's name is Diesel. You get a sense of who these people are, that they are going in a truck. Just remember, toward the truck, and truck is capitalized. It doesn't need to be capitalized there. Anytime you reference Dunkin' Donuts, it's a proper noun, so a Dunkin's run. You want to put the D in capital letters as well. And then I think the story gets interesting too when he's like, I remember reading the things they carried, the short story, and that he's having that's a thread that kind of runs through the story where he's thinking about that. I thought that was a really smart choice to have that happening. And I'm not sure if you remember the story, but that might be a good chance to just kind of remind us what the story is, and maybe some detail that you remembered from it, because the things they carried were all about learning about characters through, and I know it was in our book, learning about characters through what they carried with them. And I think you could reference that in this story somewhere, just a small detail that you remembered, that one of the, name the character and what he carried, and maybe have a quick reflective moment. So you don't have to pull the story into this story, but I like that you did. So then they have this moment where they're going up the mountain. You start referring to her as your fiance. I would use her name. Maybe one time tell us that she's the fiance, but I wouldn't keep repeating that description for her, because it takes us, when we get into fiance, it could be anybody's fiance. We want to know it's this particular woman, and we want to be reminded of what her name is and how she acts. So I would say maybe one time in the story that she's your fiance, but then I would move away from that. And remember, this whole time, this is where the tense starts shifting. Stay in present tense, so make all of your verbs present. Make sure you're capitalizing Diesel's name through it. And then I like that she's sort of talking, she's fiddling with the camera, and then the bear comes, right? and you have this moment of high tension in the story, which all stories need to get to that high tension moment. I know my daughter's behind me. Go!
I want food.
And you get to that in a second. I'll be right there. So I would play out this moment where the bear comes a little bit more, right? Let us really fear that this is happening and that the bear's here. Really build that moment up a little bit higher. I'd spend at least just a little bit longer there, because you have this moment where this couple now is, you know, potentially fearing for their life. And I like that the dog saves them, but really help us build that tension a little bit before it all gets resolved really quickly. So I'd spend just a little bit of time there. And then again, make sure that you're just editing some of the word minute, and make sure your paragraphs are indented on this page as well. And then I like this moment. Again, I think the story was both about the relationship of the two characters, and then also about them running into a bear. But I like that at the end of the story, then they have this moment where he's like, can't wait to go back, and she's like, no way. I think it resolves both the relationship at that moment and is playful, and then also resolves the bear moment. So I think you do a really nice job finishing that off. Stories don't have to have these big resolutions. They just, in that moment, the characters need to have some resolve, and I think you do that really well. So I hope that's helpful to you. So for my revision moments would be about getting the whole story into present tense, making sure you clean up some of the mechanics of it, maybe play that bear moment a little bit longer. But I think you did a really nice job with descriptions, physical details, the way the characters were interacting. So really good job with, I would assume, is one of the first stories you've ever written. So let me know. Feel free to stop by my office if you have more questions. But good luck finishing up your semester, and I will look forward to reading your writing portfolio.